Hello and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm your host Sharon, and today we're discussing HDMI 2.1 and checking out some of the latest products at the Tom's Hardware Lab. So let's kick things off live. So as always, we're live and taking questions from the audience. So if you have any question you'd like to ask, just drop it into the chat on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll try to discuss it live on air. So joining me today is Tom's Hardware staff writer, Michelle Earhart. How are you, Michelle?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. Glad to have you. And we're also happy to welcome our special guest, Jeff Park, HDMI Licensing Administrator, CTO. What's going on, Jeff?
Hi, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it. Looking forward to discussing the fun stuff of HDMI.
Yeah, absolutely. We're great. Really happy to have you on the show this week because Michelle and I spent all last week covering CES, and during the show we covered some laptops and some monitors that support the HDMI 2.1 spec. So I know that spec was built a lot with gamers in mind. So can you talk a little bit about, Jeff, the improvements 2.1 brings over 2.0 and what that means for gamers specifically?
Sure. So HDMI 2.1 was released a couple years ago, and a lot of the manufacturers had a lot of the features available on most of the high-end stuff, right? So this year, what's the big difference is we're seeing a lot more proliferation of HDMI 2.1 features in a more mass market, affordable devices. And this was really spurred on by the release of the new game consoles, the Xbox and the PS5, and as well as the new GPUs on the PC side of things, NVIDIA as well as AMD, adding support for HDMI 2.1 features in their systems and GPUs. So one of the key features of HDMI 2.1 versus 2.0, we made a big jump in terms of bandwidth. So bandwidth is what gives you the ability to send, things like 4K 120 or 8K or higher video or audio. So we jumped from, in terms of numbers, HDMI 2.0 was 18 gigabits per second in terms of raw bandwidth, and we jumped up to 48 gigabits. So it's quite big of a jump. It's more than double the bandwidth, right? So what that means is we have if you think about it, it's a pipe, right? So we have a bigger pipe to be able to send whatever you want. So if it's, for example, on the new game consoles, you can easily now do 4K 120. If you want to do 8K, you could do 8K, right? So it gives you a lot of flexibility in bandwidth and everything else in between. So if you want to do 1440p at 240 or something like that, you can do other combinations as well. The bandwidth is really there for devices and displays to be able to match up and maximize whatever the capabilities are, right? So it gives you a lot of flexibility. Additionally, if you're a PC gamer, you're very familiar with, variable refresh rate feature, which, NVIDIA has their G-Sync and AMD has their FreeSync. And there's also adaptive sync. So lots of variations of that feature. And HDMI added that to HDMI 2.1 as well. HDMI also supports features that already exist, like G-Sync, FreeSync, and other things over HDMI. But what HDMI did was really make it device agnostic or GPU agnostic. So what that means is you don't specifically have to have like an NVIDIA or AMD to be able to take advantage of some of these FreeSync. Or adaptive variable refresh, or VRR as we call it. So what that gives you now is whatever TV you buy that supports VRR with any GPU or CPU or consoles that support it, you can now take full advantage of that, right? So that really gives consumers a lot of choice now. No longer is it really high-end or PC-centric type of monitors. Now you can actually get a large display at an affordable price on the TV segment as well. That supports a lot of the features. Additionally, we also support it for things like auto low latency. So auto low latency is something really that happens in the background. It's not something like you would typically see in a menu item. So what happens is if you have a TV, for example, typically you'll see TV modes, right? Like movie, gaming, or maybe vivid or dynamic, or different kind of modes depending on how you like the picture. And if you're watching a movie, you want it a little bit dim because you have the lights off. And then if you want to play games, you want a little bit brighter and low latency in terms of picture processing. So you reduce that. So those kind of things previously you had to manually select, right? So go to the menu and select game mode or select movie mode depending on what you're doing. what auto low latency mode does is now allows, for example, like a game console or GPU on a PC to control the TV so that they can say, okay, I'm going to send you games, so please switch to game mode. So the TV automatically switches game mode. And let's say on your console now you want to watch Netflix or Hulu or some other video on YouTube, then it can now tell the TV, okay, switch back to video mode or movie mode, whatever is relevant for that TV. So it really makes it simple for the users to be able to take full advantage of the best picture quality possible on their display, whether it be a monitor or TV. If it supports switching of picture modes or any relevant modes that it defines as like a game mode or movie mode, the source device can take advantage of that and really gives the flexibility to consumers not to worry about it, right? So they take advantage of their full capability of their display. And there's other underlining stuff. So there's what's called a quick frame transport. That's something, again, totally happens in the background. There's no menu setting or anything like that. But basically what it does is it allows input lag to be reduced on the transmission line. So when signals go from source to the display, there's certain timing involved. So this feature is very geeky, but basically at the end of the day, it helps reduce the input lag. So all that combined, and a lot of those TVs and monitors being released today, in addition to the sources I've mentioned, support many of these features, if not all, right? So all those features combined really brings forth, high-level gaming experience that typically required, the $3,000 RTX NVIDIA system, a year ago. I mean, maybe 6 months ago, that you needed to run like an 8K or even 4K 120. Now you can do it with a $500 game console, right? So and less than $1,000 TV eventually, right? So the lower cost TVs are baking in a lot of these features, and we expect, CES was great because a lot of TV manufacturers brought forth many of the features, if not all the features I mentioned in the high end, which was last year.
Great. So again, for the viewers, if you have any questions on 2.1 for Jeff, drop them in. In the meantime, Jeff, I wanted to talk to you. So those are a lot of features that, like you mentioned, are available in monitors and TVs. So I'm curious how you see the lines between PC monitors and TVs perhaps changing, because before, you had to buy a gaming monitor if you wanted to get over 60 hertz and to have smooth gaming experience, but it seems like that's starting to change.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's great for consumers. So what's happening now is the TV guys are adding all these advanced gaming features that were, until recently was very PC centric, right? High-end PC gaming monitors, but they're bringing them in, right? So doing things at 120 or higher, for example, and doing 4K at 120 or maybe even higher, depending on the display, because some can even do 8K now, right? So now what's happening is the TV guys typically was, if you look at TVs, go to Costco or any retailer, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? But we're seeing a trend of actually getting smaller in terms of size. So what I mean by that is instead of having 65, 75, 85 TVs, we're starting to see 50, 48-inch TVs kind of shrinking a little bit, but without losing features, right? Because typically if you shop for TVs in the past, you would see TVs smaller, have less features. What's happening now is even the smaller TVs are getting all the features, if not more. So what they're targeting is, and what kind of trend we're seeing is that these smaller TVs are now competing for the larger monitors, right? So if you wanted 35-inch, 40-inch displays on a monitor, you're going to pay quite a bit, right? But now you have the option to now even look at a TV, maybe 50-inch or 40-something inch TV as your desktop monitor, right? Because if you look at a 50-inch monitor, for example, that's equivalent to about 4 27-inch, 24, 27-inch monitors. So if you're already running multi-display, I mean, it's not out of reach to say putting a 50 or 55-inch TV as your desktop monitor because it's equivalent to the screen real estate of running 4 monitors or even 3 monitors, right? So I think it gives consumers more choice, and now I think it brings down a lot of the pricing for many of the features, especially 4K 120. We expect 4K 120 variable refresh rate to be very commonplace in TVs. So what that means is now no longer are you kind of stuck having to go monitor only at a gaming monitor, especially because they seem to be a little more expensive. and sacrifice a lot of times the size, right? Because monitors typically, if you want to go past 32 inches or even 35, 36 to 40s, it gets pretty pricey, right? Even if you pick the cheaper version of the gaming monitors, right? So I think because TVs generally are that market is so competitive, the pricing for displays will come down and plus they're shrinking the size of the screen, so it's becoming more viable as a desktop display. And I think that's really good for consumers because now you're no longer kind of stuck in a monitor space looking at the super high-end game monitors. If you want a big display, now you can consider TVs because you don't really lose out much at the same price point or very close to it. But at the end of the day, even if the same price point, in most cases, as far as I've seen in the market, you're going to get a much bigger screen size. And that may, depending on your setup, of course, you don't want to, 80 inch in front of your screen if you're only 3 feet. But I think, 50s and 40s can be viable for a desktop monitor, especially if you're replacing multi-monitors, right? If you already have 4 or 5 monitors, it's not a reach to go a 50-inch TV, for example. So
if you have 4 or 5 monitors, lucky you. Michelle, what's your takes? I know you do some PC and console gaming, so where do you stand on monitors versus TVs?
It's actually I'm liking a lot of what I'm hearing. My monitor that I'm looking at right now is actually attached to my PC through DVI because it's a 144 hertz monitor, and my graphics card doesn't have an HDMI port capable of doing 144 hertz with that. So, I have to run my audio separately through external speakers that I have, which is a shame because my monitor does have speakers that would be convenient to use sometimes, and I'm missing out on that feature. So that's a nice thing to have. But also looking at console gaming, I have an old TV with 60 hertz refresh rate, but it's large, and that's the reason I bought it on a Black Friday deal a few years ago, sitting in my living room. And it was fine for older consoles that couldn't get higher refresh rates. It can't do 4K, but 4K is not really a big deal for me. I care about those refresh rates more. But now that we have new consoles coming out that can do both 4K and high refresh rates, I feel like unless TVs start to catch up, a lot of casual users are going to miss out on those features and may not even know that they're missing out on those features. They're just going to plug their console into their TV and assume they can get everything that it can do out of it. So being able to get more bandwidth to those casual users who don't spend a lot of time looking up their TV's refresh rate, or even if it has a higher refresh rate, the ports that support that, it's something that I would really appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point, and that's one of the motivations of HDMI is regardless of the feature. I mean, all the gaming feature, personally I love it because I'm a gamer, but regardless of the feature, one of our goals is to make everything so it's simple plug and play. So one thing I always tell internally as our goal is, it may sound weird, but if we do our job perfectly, everything perfect, then nobody would ever talk about HDMI because it just works, right? Everything works. There should be no discussion, and every product supports every feature, and they're all affordable price regardless of how high tech it is and all that, right? So I mean that's a dream of mine, but eventually I think one of the things I think we've done well is that make the technology itself almost invisible, right? Because if you think about it, with HDMI 2.1, we're pushing 48 gigabits. I mean, 48 gigabits, you're talking data center stuff, right? I mean, most data centers don't even have that kind of bandwidth running through their systems. So I think those kind of things, is our goal always to, regardless of complication and how complicated technology, it should never feel like a PC gaming environment where even if you're using a PC or whatever, when HDMI is involved, it should all work and give you that experience. Like you said, people shouldn't have to think about, am I getting 120 or am I getting 240 or whatever it may be, 4K or combination of both. When you plug it in, you get the best feature available based on the devices you have, and that's how HDMI was built. And in most cases, that's how it works within the industry. So
related to that, we have a question from Hara Puzo. How do you know an HDMI cable is truly capable of all HDMI 2.1 features? I bought what I thought was a suitable cable from Costco as it stated 8K, but upon reading the packaging, it wasn't HDMI 2.1. So Jeff, how can people make sure they're getting a cable that supports all of HDMI 2.1's capabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with the release of HDMI 2.1 specification, we also introduced a new cable. So the new cable doesn't mean physically it looks the same, right? So it's all backwards compatible, work with all existing devices. But the new cable is definitely defining new testing criteria, much stringent testing criteria to support the higher bandwidth. So these cables are called ultra high speed HDMI cables. So if you go to hdmi.org and go to the HDMI 2.1 section, you'll see the section about ultra high speed HDMI cable. And there you'll see the label. So we created a label that are specifically made for the ultra high speed HDMI cables. And so the ultra high speed HDMI cable label is a copy protection label, so to ensure there's no counterfeit, right? And you can even scan with our HDMI app just to make sure it's legitimate. But any cable that has that label has been tested to support that full 48 gigabits that supports all the features of HDMI 2.1. So the key is to look for that logo and check out hdmi.org to see what it looks like. Online retailers and as well as offline retailers all have these available. I think the quantity is still ramping up, so not every brand might have them, but we're seeing more and more coming out into market, and consoles like Xbox, I believe, others bundle them as well. So if you get the latest and greatest, a lot of the times they will bundle with the appropriate ultra high speed HDMI cable. But look for that logo. It's fairly distinct because it's actual label, and that label itself they can only get from us. So what that means is they can't just make a fake one and try to register it, because we control the supply. We provide them to the manufacturers. So even if they try to make a fake one, it would never go to our website for verification, right? So you look for that. It would have a little hologram as well, so it's very distinct, and you'll be able to find it in most cable retailers.
So I heard there are actually like factory raids to look for counterfeit HDMI products. Do you know what those look like at all, Jeff? Because I'm picturing like a bunch of people in all black with HDMI on their chest coming in through the glass ceiling on ropes. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. Don't forget the tanks. Don't forget the tanks. No, it's something. I mean, that's a great question because it's something we don't really talk about publicly. We have an entire team dedicated for HDMI compliance. So, one of the things that made HDMI very successful, and most consumers are not aware of, is that there's a complete compliance program for everything from cables to source devices to displays and TVs. So what that means is every time you make anything HDMI related, cables to TVs to everything else in between, you have to go through a compliance testing and meet all the compliance requirements. So testing is part of that, and there's many other things you have to meet. And we did that because we want to ensure that whether you buy Jeff's TV or Michelle's game console, it shouldn't matter. If it has HDMI, both have HDMI, it should just work, right? So that's one of the things. And as part of that, our compliance team works with various government agencies. So for example, in the US, it's CBP, so Customs Border Patrol, to identify and seize products, for example, like stuff coming in that we know are illegitimate, non-compliant, then they get seized, right, for example. Additionally, we go to the actual source because, there's so many, it's almost 1 billion HDMI products, not counting cables, right, shipping this year, I believe, that's the estimate. So that's a lot of products. So it's, it's like stopping drugs at the border. We're not going to catch everything. So what we do is we take a multi-pronged approach where we work with stuff coming into countries at the border, but also go to the countries where they're actually made, right? So in Asia, for example, we work with local government agencies to identify and find these factories. And you'd be surprised because, it's almost like a whack-a-mole because a lot of them are small operations, a lot of them. Some are, bigger, but we've seen where this is one story I still can't believe it's true, but it's actually true, is we found one factory went to shut down. It was literally a hut. I mean, fairly decent size, but literally a hut, straws and mud looked like. And people were building these like so-called HDMI cables by hand in the factory. Like, I don't remember how many workers were there. But that's one thing, right? We shut it down, they appear again. But we have that actively going, and that's to prevent consumers from having to deal with these products that are missing stuff, right? So I've seen cables on certain websites being sold that had like wires missing. I mean, they would work most of the time, but the one time you want to use something else, it would stop working. And if we took the cable apart, and it's like there's wires missing. And so it's always a challenge for us because of the fact that HDMI is everywhere. But we do have a constant compliance team that monitors, websites, trade shows. Before everything got shut down, they would actually go to trade shows and physically verify products or non-compliant products or counterfeit products that do that. And we have teams worldwide doing that, right? So we're not perfect. There's always going to be stuff that gets through, but we have teams constantly looking for that, and we make sure we prevent consumers from having bad experiences with those non-compliant products. And RAID is just one part of that entire program that we have to ensure compliance across the board, regardless of whether you're a huge guy, small guy. We want to make sure they all work together.
So Michelle, you got to hide all your fake HDMI products.
Oh no, in my background.
So I have a question regarding 4K, and I see Martin Benjamin Hughes is also interested in 4K. So I have a question regarding the spec, because we know it can do 4K at 120 hertz, and we know the bandwidth is 48 gigs. So could HDMI 2.1 therefore support 4K at 144 hertz uncompressed? Because from what I understand, that requires 39 gigs, and HDMI 2.1 is at 48.
Yeah, so that won't be possible uncompressed, but just like in the PC world, DSC is possible, right? So DSC is an option in DisplayPort, right? So that's fairly commonly used, especially if you have a 5K monitor or anything above 4K. So now HDMI with 2.1, we also added support for DSC. So we expect DSC to be something that's commonplace in the TV world as it is in the CE world once we go above 4K. And so anything, because right now our support for DSC can push up to 10K at 120 right now. So or any combination of, you can lower the resolution and get crazy high frame rates if you want, or vice versa, right? So the headroom is there with DSC, and we're hearing we expect TV manufacturers to add DSC support as well as they move towards 8K and higher. So.
Okay, and Martin is wondering if there's an HDMI 2.3 spec available for televisions, or is the highest 2.1 for TVs as well?
Yeah, right now the HDMI specification is up to HDMI 2.1. Okay. And then we're constantly, so this is an ongoing thing. It's not like we just do it whenever there's a new release, but every year we constantly evolve the test spec. So this year, I think our focus is really enhancing the test of HDMI products across the board. So that's something that's ongoing. We always add new tests, we enhance new tests, and we work with the test equipment manufacturers to make things better, right? So that's, again, transparent to the consumer, but that's something that always happens in the background. That's one of the key jobs that I have, is to ensure that compliance is as best as possible across the board of all the products.
And so we also have a viewer question from Samuel Bledsoe asking, what is the best, oh, he's saying hello very aggressively too, I like. He's saying he would like to know what is the best length of a HDMI 2.1 cable. So I guess the question being, does performance change depending on the length of the cable, or can you expect the same performance regardless?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not a simple question, but I mean, because there's different ways to construct cable in the HDMI world. So the very basic is the copper cable, right? So it just has copper wires and just runs. Those are your run-of-the-mill cables, and typically they max out at around 5 meters. So I don't remember what the feet is, but 5 meters is usually the max we see in consumer, passive wire. So that's about 16 feet. So that's fairly common. Most people don't need that. Most people would be okay with 2 to 3 meters. That's fairly common. But if you go beyond that, so why would you go beyond that? Well, if you're doing like a office installation and other places, or you have a projector on the wall and you have to run from your devices and it goes through the ceiling and the wall, maybe you need like 30 feet or whatever, right? So once you get into those kind of custom installation or in-wall installation, then you would need to use what we call active cables. So what active cables are, you would see them as in the heads, the connector, usually on one side, they would have active electronics in there to help boost the signal, and then run it like, very long. Some even use optical in between. So those things can go like, I've seen up to like 100 feet, 200 feet. I mean, they go pretty long. I think some of the optical ones probably can go like 300 feet, 100 meters or so, right? So there's a lot of options available when it comes to cabling, but most consumers, I think, would probably be okay with 2 to 3 meters. But if you really needed to, you'd be able to find up to 5 meters for the copper only. And then once you go, if you need beyond that, then you have to get these specialized active cables or converter cables that have optical in between.
This is a question that I was very curious about because before I had my console set up that I do now, I just used to have a long HDMI cable running from my desktop to my living room TV, and I would kind of use it for both. And when I was researching that, I came to the conclusion that it wasn't really a big issue, but a lot of people were concerned about input lag with that sort of thing. Is that an issue that you have to worry about?
No, not really. Not for a long cable. Like if you're saying I have a 5-meter cable versus 10-meter cable, or 10-foot cable versus 20-foot cable. I mean, if you're that sensitive to input lag, I mean, I don't think you're human, right? So because the cable itself, that speed of light, and you're talking minuscule, maybe it's measurable. I don't even think it's measurable in terms of like versus human input, right? So that's not really something. But there's one thing to that is, if you're running super long cables and you're using like converter cables, what we call, basically they convert to like optical and back, or depending on the converter tech they're using and the chip, again, it varies between manufacturers, but they're potentially, whenever there's conversion going on, because if you're doing optical, for example, you have to convert from the source HDMI, convert to optical, then convert back to HDMI, and then and plug back into a display, right? So, and you're going through like 100 meters or 300 feet or something, you could potentially have input lag there because you have 2 points of conversion, right? And the length is really not the issue because of the speed of light, but again, if you're doing any kind of processing at multiple points, then you could potentially introduce input lag, because now that conversion point, yeah, it's milliseconds maybe, but you're adding 1 or 2 milliseconds here and 1 or 2 milliseconds there. And I think Xbox or Microsoft did some study where anywhere close to like 8 milliseconds, like additional 8 milliseconds, is actually perceivable by most people, especially if it's very timing based, right? Like Beat Saber, if you're playing Beat Saber, 8 milliseconds may be noticeable, right? So I think there's to that, but I think most consumers wouldn't run into that because of the fact that they won't be running like a 300 feet, converter cable, right? So.
Okay, and I want to squeeze in one more question because Javier said, please. I don't know, Jeff, if you know the answer to this, but you're an expert, so let's give it a try. Does HDCP 2.2 have any requirements around bandwidth or anything like that? Javier says they're having problems activating HDCP 2.2 between their Android box and screen. Sometimes it's HDCP 1.1, other times it's 2.2. So do you know about this, Jeff?
So I can give some answer. I know I have some knowledge in this, but just to be clear, HDCP is not from us. It's actually developed by Intel. Intel created it for the studios, the content owners, because they want to protect their content. And HDCP is used for HDMI and DisplayPort and other places to protect content whenever it's sent uncompressed, right? So having said that, the difference between the versions is HDCP 2.3 is the latest, but 2.2 and 2.3, there's no huge difference. But there's a pretty big difference from 1.x to 2.2, 2.3. And as far as I understand it, depending on the content and the content provider, they may restrict content being delivered over anything below HDCP 2.2. So again, that depends on the device manufacturer as well as the content provider that actually sends the content out. And that's more of it's not a technical issue, it's more of a legal issue as far as I understand it, because the devices can theoretically send it out using HDCP 1.1 because HDCP itself really doesn't take up much bandwidth, if at all. I mean, it's just basically metadata communicating keys and exchanging some cipher information, but not really data as in like video data or anything like that, right? So it's very minuscule in terms of actual bandwidth, but it's more of what the requirements are, licensing, and it gets a little complicated. But generally speaking, in today's world, HDCP 2.2 is going to be required for a majority of the content that's coming out, because especially with 4K and HDR and other things being added, it's getting pretty commonplace that those kind of content will be only available if the device is outputting it supports HDCP 2.2.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Javier, I hope that helped. So yeah, it looks like that's all the time we have with Jeff today. So Jeff, thank you so much for stopping by and filling us in on the latest with HDMI. Do you have any last words before you go?
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for having me. Those are some great questions. We should definitely do this again. I think it's helpful for me to kind of convey information. But I think one of the things that we always look for is feedback, good or bad, right? Because we're not perfect, but I think that's the only way we get better. And taking questions as well as hearing from you guys, right? What you guys hear or what you guys are concerned about is always helpful. So I appreciate that, and I look forward to all the great HDMI 2.1 stuff coming out this year, and hopefully the gamers out there gets to enjoy all the new great features.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you for joining us, Jeff.
Yes, thank you for.
We have another guest in Jeff's background.
He just woke up. Okay.
Jeff.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So Michelle and I are still with you all, and we're always testing tech at Tom's Hardware, and today we wanted to give you a sneak peek. So first up is this headset here. This is here. Let me bring myself up a little bigger, or we could do that in a second. This is the Asus ROG Delta S. It's currently going for $230, and you could see. Thanks, Michelle. These are the ear cups. They're fake leather here. They're pretty squishy, which will aid in the comfort, which I'll tell you about in a second. But they also come with interchangeable fabric ear cups if you prefer that, because it's a little less warm. But this headset actually has some pizzazz to it too. So give me 1 second and I will show you.
In the meantime, we can talk about, I guess, my headset for comparison. This is a Sennheiser, I think, Game Zero, which has these cloth sort of ear cups. Are you back, Sharon?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, awesome. So let me give you guys a look because I'm all lit. Can you see that well, Michelle? I can't.
I can.
Okay, so if you look really closely, you should be able to tell that it's not just RGB, but the RGB is syncing with the sound of my voice. So if I speak really quietly, the RGB should be less aggressive. And if I speak louder, the RGB should be more aggressive. So what I like about this feature is that it worked right out of the box. I didn't have to download any software to make it happen. The RGB is it's like an aqua blue. You can't really see in the video because of the lighting, and I'm using a webcam, blah, blah, blah. But it's an aqua blue out of the box. But you could also switch over to standard RGB. So it's not reacting with my voice right now. And this, of course, would be programmable via software if I were to download it. And if you want to be more normal, you could turn off the RGB completely. So that's just a little taste of that. Just a preview, like I said, so you'll have to stay tuned to tomshardware.com to see the whole review in terms of audio quality, gaming performance, things like that. But you are getting a taste of the mic right now. So curious what you think about that, Michelle.
See, no, we were talking about this a little bit before the show, and I wasn't sure if it was in my head or not. But the very first comment we get about this from Javier is we don't have the echo anymore, which is interesting to me because this is like a standard headset boom mic that you're recording on right now. But normally you do these shows with the Razer Siren, right?
Yeah, so what I was using before was a desktop Razer Siren X. And this mic here is a unidirectional mic. It does have AI noise cancellation, which could be the big factor here. And that would also help with the RGB effect, so it won't be, flashing when random background noise comes on. Um, so yeah, that's my best answer for you now. That's pretty surprising because it's versus, a dedicated desktop mic. However, again, this is $230. It is not a cheap headset by any means. I will also say that it's pretty comfortable. There's virtually no pressure on my head right now, very little pressure on the sides of my head. We've lost some bass. We're hearing from Javier Perea.
So there's a
Um,
bit of a trade-off, even if
yes,
you lose the echo.
yeah. And then unfortunately, as I am now, I can see myself on camera. You can't see any of the RGB, which is always a downside of RGB headsets. Like I'd have to film like this the whole show for you to get the effect. So that is a downside. What do you think, Michelle? Is it worth the RGB fun?
See, that's what it has me curious is who the RGB is for. Because it's not for you, because you're going to be seeing it. So maybe it's for your streaming audience or your coworkers, I guess. But unless you have your head tilted, they're not going to see it either.
Or if I do
So
like an artsy camera angle, like
some
up
people
here.
do like have like multiple angles when they're streaming, so they'll have like a this or whatever in
Yeah.
addition to like a direct on webcam. That's the only thing where I can like imagine someone actually getting a ton of use out of this. Otherwise, I mean, it's kind of cool, but I'm not looking at like the side of my headphones all the time, except like when I don't have them
It
on.
worked pretty well too. Like the syncing of my voice, I
I
felt like
saw.
it
Can
worked
you, when
well.
it's syncing with your voice, can you customize the color, or is that only when it's like just going without syncing?
Yeah, but to customize the RGB, I'd have to download the software, which isn't, I mean, that's pretty standard, but I think it's pretty great that Asus made you have three different RGB effects you can control on the mic on the headset itself without having to download software. So I could get away with it, I think, unless I wanted to do some audio tweaking or I really cared about the color of my RGB, which
The
I might.
one the one thing that I think is if you have a headset stand on your desk,
Mm-hmm.
it could add some like nice mood lighting to your desk when you
Yeah.
don't have it on you, which isn't something, that appeals to everyone, but there are RGB mouse bungees and of course like RGB keyboards, even when you're not using them, are there adding some mood lighting to your desk. So it can help increase the ambiance, I suppose.
I like how you think, Michelle, using your RGB to decorate. Javier is asking, some mics have a headphone output to hear yourself. Could you do the same with a headphone? Not with any gaming headset that I've tested. Do you know of any that you could do that, Michelle?
No, the first microphone I got with one of those is the Blue Yeti that I'm recording on right now. It has a little thing down here at the bottom that you can plug in to hear yourself, that I don't normally use, but not on something as small or not standalone like that. I haven't seen.
There is a program called, well, I'm sure there's many, but there's one I use called Audacity that you could download for free and you can record yourself and just play it back and try it that way. And there's some companies have software that have more advanced mic control features. But again, I didn't download the software for this because it's kind of easy to use right out of the box. But these are things we'll be looking more into as we do our full review. So stay tuned for that review. Again, this is a ROG Delta S. It's 230 right now, so we'll definitely want to test it out a lot Yeah, Michelle?
One thing that I'm curious about before we move on is just, I was showing my mic earlier, mostly to fill time, but my mic has this nice, or my headset has this nice sort of like swing down thing with the boom mic. And it's stretchy, you know, in front. And it looks like yours has the stretchiness, but how does the boom mic sort of store normally?
So it's not stretchy, it's detachable.
Okay.
And there's a volume mic here. I just muted it by pressing it in. I turned red, but it's not retractable.
Okay. That's interesting. Because on my some microphones or headsets that I've used have like a mute button that you push. This one you mute it by swinging the mic arm up. But this one you can just remove the mic, so it's almost sort of double purpose. It can work as headphones too, I suppose. Again, this is all preview, but I was just curious because it didn't look like that could swing at all. I'm seeing a question, how much is the Sennheiser? Honestly, it's been a little bit since I've bought it. I think it was in the 180 range, but we're not reviewing that. It's been out for a little bit. But I believe the name is a Sennheiser Game Zero, so you can look that up in your spare time.
And I'll keep this on so you can keep judging the mic quality. And if you have any questions, drop them in and we'll take a look. But in the meantime, I want to kick things over to Michelle because you've also been testing something that you're going to show us. And to give everyone a hint, you've kind of been showing it off to us this whole time.
Sure. So this week I've been working on webcams a lot because as we enter into the new year, the webcam market has shifted a little bit. Webcams aren't something that we used to think about a ton as these hyper desirable items, but as we move into work from home, or at least a lot of us do, they've become very desirable and sort of more costly. So we've been working on reviewing webcams to sort of help people decide what to get in this suddenly more sort of active market. And towards the end of December, it seemed like that market was maybe slowing down. The way we've been doing webcams lately is we have a list of like best picks if the market is fine and stock of everything is in. And then we have a list of like things that maybe have some more pros and cons, but are more generally available. Towards the end of the year, it seemed like stock was gonna sort of chill out and we could just like pretty confidently recommend things like the Logitech C920, which is a gold standard. It's what you're seeing right now, or the Razer Kio, or these things from well-known brands. But as we've gotten into January, while things aren't as bad as they were earlier in the year, they're starting to become a little more mixed. So the Logitech C920, you can still get at a decent price. The Razer Kio, you can't. Other Logitech webcams like the Logitech StreamCam, which is built specifically for streaming, it's great. The Logitech C930, which is a slightly more beefed up version of the C920, it's not so good. So we started to sort of review these third-party webcams again. What I've been working on right now is you're seeing the C920, but if I can swap it over here, this week we looked at something called the Ptz Optics Webcam 80, which is one of these C920 clones, I want to say, for when they're not as available, from a company that we, haven't had a lot of history of looking at. This is a company that mostly does security cameras, and this is their first webcam. And you can kind of tell that heritage, again, just to compare it to the C920. It's not as high detail, but it has a slightly wider field of view. That said, you do get some trade-offs in color accuracy. This makes me look a lot more tan that I normally do. We have some people in the audience saying, it doesn't have a stable frame rate. When I was testing this, it's not showing up as much on video, but I noticed a lot of sharpness on things like my hair, where you get these dark, almost cell shaded segments to photos I took, which made it look cool and comic booky. But most people are buying webcams to, telecommute or to meet with our coworkers. So not highly professional. This is just one webcam. It's not indicative of them all, but it shows the sort of state of the market right now, which is that, if worse comes to worse, you can get things that are like the gold standards, but you're going to be getting some trade-offs. Not every webcam, has the color issues that this one does, but they might have worse field of view, or they might have less maneuverability. So this webcam can only tilt up and down. Some of them can go side to side as well. But yeah, that's sort of what I've been looking at lately, is that the market is once again hostile. And we're going to start reviewing these sort of third-party webcams more frequently to help you sort of pick the wheat from the chaff.
Okay, so question. Well, first, I should correct myself because I said you were showing the webcam the whole time, but you were actually using the Logitech C920 before. So just to clarify. And I also coincidentally am using the C920. So that gives you two different examples. So right now you're on what camera, Michelle?
I am on the Ptz Optics Webcam 80.
Okay, so my question is, in that case behind you with the figurines, is there a light in there?
There is a light in there, yes.
Okay, it's definitely a warmer, slightly darker view, and that light is more like warm and yellow on this webcam compared to the Logitech.
Which is interesting because in real life, it's just a bunch of white LEDs. So everything looks way more warm and yellow with this webcam than you get with the Logitech. So if I swap over again, it still looks a little yellow, but you can see my face looks a lot more close to what you would see in real life.
And is there I guess a refresh rate spec for the camera? Because Javier mentioned it doesn't look like it's 30 frames per second.
So, another thing with these sort of lesser known companies is this webcam advertises 1080p at 30 FPS recording. Nothing on the box or in the packaging will tell you otherwise. But in testing, you can tell that it hits that sometimes, but maybe not consistently. So, when you're buying one of these are the type, again, not to single out this webcam in particular, it's just indicative of the market right now. When you're buying one of these are the types of webcams that usually show up like on Amazon right now when you search, because they are the ones that have the most stock. If you look at our best webcams article on Tom's Hardware, we've looked at a lot of those, and even the ones that are the highest sellers have these sort of trade-offs. So it's always good to sort of look at user reviews are always there. These reviews of these webcams from like dedicated hardware websites are a little rarer just because like there's so many of them. But there's something that we've been pushing to do more frequently. So, check Tom's Hardware if you're seeing a webcam that you're unfamiliar with and are thinking about buying.
Asif Khan brings up a good point in that they don't... I never understood why Lappy's webcam, which is a cool way to say laptop, which I might steal. I never understood why Lappy's webcams don't have average quality. Which is something I've struggled with. Like getting a laptop web camera to capture my skin tone properly is like almost impossible. Out of all the webcams I've tested on laptops, maybe one or two was acceptable in terms of color accuracy for me. We've talked to vendors about this, Michelle, but do you have any thoughts or insight as to why laptop vendors seemingly don't put that much effort into the webcam quality? It hasn't really progressed the way other aspects of laptop performance has.
So this is something that we talked about a little bit during our CES streams, which we have videos of archived on our YouTube if you want to look at. But like almost every aspect of the laptops that we were looking at during CES were upgraded except for the webcams. And you know, the usual laptop webcam tops out at 720p. Sometimes they're a little grainy, sometimes they're not. Color and texture accuracy varies between them. But the reason for this is usually thin bezels are very popular right now, as are sort of thin lids on laptops. And in order to get a 1080p camera, you either need to make the whole lid a little thicker, or you need to have like, here's the lid and here's the webcam. It has a little, you know, bit sticking out, which is not something that manufacturers are super keen to do because it differentiates them from the pack in a way that doesn't immediately look super attractive. The alternative to that then, instead of putting the webcam up top at the top of the screen, above the screen, is to put it below the screen and to do like what's sort of called a nose cam. It's pointing up. I have a C920 here that I'm looking at, or this is the Ptz above my monitor, so I can't really emulate it. But it's not something that we have historically really liked in the past because it does not give flattering angles. So like when we were talking to MSI, they just said this openly with us on their stream, is they really wanted to put a 1080p webcam in their latest high-end laptops, but they couldn't do it while keeping the lid thin and the bezels thin, and they had to choose either between not upgrading the webcam or doing a nose cam. And they figured, even with the extra quality, the nose cam wasn't worth it.
I think they made a good call. I don't need to see up my nose or anyone else's nose for that matter. So I'd rather it be like a little bit blurry than up
Yeah.
someone's nose.
And usually 720p is, if you're streaming yourself to an audience, maybe not ideal, but if you're just doing a Google Meet or what have you, it's fine.
Yeah, and I think that might be part of it. For so long, webcams were kind of an afterthought in laptops, and now with the pandemic, they're kind of getting more attention again as they become more essential to being able to work from home, as many of us are for months and months. So they're getting more of a spotlight the past few months. So definitely keep your eyes on the website for Michelle's review. And like she mentioned, her list of the best webcams, so you could scoop one up if you are in need. I had to wait months to get one. So
Yeah, I luckily had a C920 that I bought years ago. It's still interesting to us. It's generally the webcam that if there's stock of, we would recommend. It's interesting to me that it hasn't really been dethroned. Even this Ptz Optics that I was showing off just a few minutes ago, the biggest knock against it is $10 more expensive than the C920. Well, at the same time, it doesn't have the highest quality. So Logitech has a good thing going if they can just keep the stock flowing. I didn't mean for that to rhyme.
It sounded good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. And also thank you to everyone who's been watching. If you've had some fun, show us some love by liking Tom's Hardware on Facebook, liking this video on YouTube, and of course, subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also download each episode of the Tom's Hardware Show as a podcast. So thanks again to Jeff Park from the HDMI team for stopping by. Shout out to Charmander in the background. I see you. And that is our show. We'll see you next Thursday.